Hello lovely people, I'm K3N, welcome to my channel. In this video I wanted to talk about the running stitch, and this will be the first video in a series that I'm planning called Stitches for Slow Stitching, which will demonstrate all the different stitches that I use when I make my slow stitch pieces. So I thought I'd start with the running stitch as it's obviously the most basic and in many ways the most versatile. Just before I start showing the stitching, I just wanted to mention a little bit about threads. I use various different threads, but most commonly, and I think the nicest and the best, is a stranded embroidery thread. I have two different kinds, generally either Anchor, which is made in Britain, or DMC, which is made in France, but there are other kinds depending on where in the world you are. The advantage of an embroidery thread is it comes in 6 strands, but you can split those strands up. There's 4 left there because I've already pulled 2 off. So you can combine 1 strand, 2 strands, 3 strands, all the way up to 6 if you like. In general I use 2 strands. I find that's just a nice thickness for the work that I do. So here I've got 2 strands through my needle, and I've put a knot in the end. You don't have to knot the end if you've been taught that that's not the correct way and you want to start with a back stitch, go for it, but I put a knot. So you come up, I'm just checking I'm in shot, yes. So you come up from the back of the work. I don't use a hoop either, by the way. I much prefer to hold the cloth in my hand. That way I can control the tension of the stitching. So I've come up from the back and then I'm going to go back down and up again in one movement. In a hoop, you wouldn't do that unless you were doing traditional quilting. You would go through and then come back in a second movement. So I go down and up. And the more you do this, what you'll find is a little bit like your handwriting, is you will have a rhythm of your own in terms of the length of your stitch and the length of the space in between. So I would say don't stress about that, don't think you should be getting your stitches smaller or larger or whatever. You do you, see how it comes out, and go with that. So there's just a line of hand stitching, and there I've kept the cloth quite flat. This, by the way, is some recycled linen from a pair of old trousers, and I've backed it onto a piece of old cotton sheet. In general, I like to stitch 2 layers of cloth rather than 1 layer. But you can experiment with different things. You could use some quilter's wadding or batting if you wanted it thicker, or some old blanket. But I like the feel of the cloth and a layer of sheet. So there, as I said, the thread is laying flat against the cloth. You can also now play with the tension a little bit, which normally I'd do as I stitch, but you can do it when you've done a little line. So you just pull on the thread a little bit and let the cloth bunch up. And then, I don't know if the camera can pick that up, I'll show you later on pieces with more stitching in. What it does is it pulls the thread in at the point where the thread enters the cloth, and it makes little hills and valleys. So if I turn around and go back the other way now, I'll just go through to the back. Now I can play with the position of my next line of stitching. So I'm going to come up in the middle of that stitch and go down roughly in the middle of the space. And again, it's not something to stress about, just go with the rhythm. Don't, think all the stitches have to be exactly the same size and they all have to come up in exactly the same place every time. Just stitch and get a rhythm. It's just doing it. Practice, 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 practice. And there I've got to the end. And there you see some of my stitches are bigger than the others. But, I'm happy with that. That looks fine to me. So I'm going to turn and go back the other way again. And this time I'm going to make the stitch where the space was in the last row. And all this playing with the stitching as you go, to me, is part of the whole mindful process of doing slow stitch. You're thinking about that, just something simple that you're controlling. And, your mind empties of whatever it is that it might otherwise be in there. And it's just so relaxing. Just to stitch and just to feel the cloth in your hand, the gentle sound of when I'm not whittering on, of the thread running through the cloth. So there I've done 3 rows, and I don't know if you can now see if I turn it under a slight angle, maybe the other way, the slight little dimples and ridges in the cloth. The other thing you can do, apart from playing with the size of your stitches and the placement of them, is you can play with the length of your stitch, the direction of your stitches. So if I come up here and then go at a right angle, I can go back the other way, and then I can deliberately miss out the other stitches so that I don't cross them over, or I can, I'm not in line with any, so you'll have to bear with me when I come back in the other direction. Or I can deliberately aim to hit one of the other stitches somewhere along its length. I'll do it here. It's going to work. Yes, it's going to work. Here. So this stitch, and then you've made a cross. I mean, I don't see myself here doing running stitch. Doing cross stitch. I'm doing running stitch. The crosses are arriving serendipitously. There's a word. There's a word to conjure with. So there you can play with direction. And then obviously within all that, you can also play with thickness of thread. Like I said, I usually use 2 strands of floss. Hard to say. But you could try with 1 fine strand. You could use a finer thread. Just come up to the front so that my needle's not hiding and then it'll bite me. You could use a finer sewing thread. I have quite a lot of these Silco. These are made for machine, so they're very tightly and smoothly plied. So they give a different effect on the surface of the cloth. Or something like this, which is not a brand that I really know of. It's called Valdani. It's made in Romania. But this is an 8-weight thread. The smaller the number, the thicker the thread, because it's how many meters per gram, I do believe. You'll correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. So basically, 8 meters of that weighs a gram, whereas this is a 40-weight thread, and it takes 40 meters of that to weigh a gram. So I'm told. So you can experiment with different kinds of threads as well. So now I just wanted to quickly show you some pieces that I've got here where I've used running stitch. So on this piece, this is my sewing pouch, as turned up before in other videos. He always manages to weasel his way in. All I've done there to hold, there's actually 3 layers of cloth there. There's a front and a back and a bit in the middle, which is some cotton wadding. All I've done there is parallel lines of running stitch. And if I turn it on its side, I hope you can see it's like, you know, on the beach where the tide's gone out and the sand is ripply. That's what it always reminds me of. So that's just lots and lots of running stitch done roughly parallel to each other over the whole surface of the cloth. On this little bag here, I've done here again running stitch in both directions, in the same direction. On this one, I've done running stitch round the perimeter of the square, and so then what's happened here on the corners is where it's crossed, you've got it going in both directions. So again, here and there you've made serendipitous little crosses. And on this side, in this square, I've done it going this way, in this square this way, in this square this way, in this square this way. And then in the middle, I've stitched around a circle that I've, what I usually do is pin on a paper template, just a circle that I've drawn, and stitch around the edge of it and then take the paper off. But you could also draw a circle with one of those blue pens or one of those heat pens, you know, that disappear with either water or heat. And there again, I've stitched around the edge and I've done a circle. But apart from the little cross in the middle, that's only running stitch on that side. On this piece here, this is a piece that I'm working on at the moment. This is just some scraps of cloth tacked on. All I'm doing now is going over the entire surface of that with running stitch in this grey 2 strands of floss. So if you look at it there, how it looks before the stitch, and then you look at it there, how it looks after the stitch, I hope you can see the difference, that the stitching there, the heavy running stitch covering the surface, kind of ties everything together and makes it feel and look more like one cohesive cloth. And in this one here, again, I've used some other stitching as well, but also a lot of running stitch here on this piece of silk, where hopefully you can really see those ripples that I keep on about because silk is so fine. And here I've done running stitch in this direction, and then I've turned just part of it and gone in the other direction. So again, only running stitch. And then the other thing I use it for quite often is if I want to apply a little patch to something, a little piece of cloth on the surface of some other cloth, then I'll just put running stitch all over, very much inspired by Japanese borrow. Just running stitch all the way along. That piece of cloth is raw edge. I've done this on clothing, you know, as a mending technique, and it goes through the wash absolutely fine. I don't bother turning edges under. And I don't know if you can see here on this red, in one direction I've got a beige or a tan coloured thread, and in the other direction I've got a very dark red, almost brown coloured thread. And on this green square I've done the green in both directions. And if I turn it over on this little piece, I've just gone in one direction, and then I've just outlined. Get your fingers out the way so they can see. I've just outlined with a running stitch. So that's the running stitch. So thank you very much for watching. There'll be future videos coming soon featuring other stitches. And meanwhile, join me again for more cloth tales. Thank you. Bye-bye.